Amen. All right. So we are continuing along in a series that we've been doing for several weeks now, and we're coming around to the finish line next week. And so what we're going through right now is a series called Christian to the Core. And really what we're doing is we're identifying 8 core values that define who a Christian is at the core of who they are, or who we as Christians should be aspiring to in our daily lives. And our Callie helped make the schedule for this, and I noticed she was the one who assigned me to the one that we had to talk about money. So I kind of thought that was fun and interesting kind of assignment. So the reality is, it is just as uncomfortable for a preacher. I'm just being really honest with you guys. It is just as uncomfortable for a preacher to talk about money from the pulpit as it is sometimes for you to sit through a sermon and talk about this. But what I have come to find is Jesus talks about it a lot. I mean, I don't know if you guys have noticed that in the Gospels. Jesus talks about this topic quite a bit. And he talks it in terms of stewardship, and that's especially where we're going to be going today. So we're going to be in Matthew chapter 25. We're going to be looking at the parable of the talents. And the core truth, I think first off, just to show you guys kind of where we are in this, we are at faithful stewardship. So next week we have integrity. And so faithful stewardship is where we're diving in today. And the core truth for that particular core value is that God looks for men and women who are faithful stewards of their finances, their time, and spiritual gifts in their personal lives and in their service to God and others. So as we look at Matthew 25 this morning, we see that Jesus is preparing his disciples for his departure. I'm going to set this up a little bit for you guys before we dive into the text itself. We will read that. And he's already told them he's coming back, but they don't know when. And we still don't know when, right? And that's sometimes the hard part. It's like, Lord, we really need you to come back. we really want you to come back. You know, the world is in such a disarray, and there's just so much darkness in the world. And there's so many ways that we feel like, you know, the enemy is advancing, but, you know, God is still going to win in the end, y'all. Jesus is still going to be triumphant in the end, and that is when he comes back. We'll see. We're in this already not yet kind of time period in the history of the world, already in the sense that the Holy Spirit is here, and he's working through his church, through us. And one day, the things that are yet to be made right, we still see that brokenness. We still see that sin. We still see those pockets of darkness in the world. But Jesus is coming to make it all right. He's coming to make it all the way that it was intended to be from the very beginning. And so the question hanging in the air is, how do we stay ready for something we can't predict, right? How do we stay ready? That's really what Jesus is looking at whenever he's looking at these parables. This is one among a few parables that he uses to help talk about this readiness. And his answer might surprise you. You'll find that readiness isn't about predicting the future or knowing when Jesus... How many times have we heard, oh, on this day, the Lord's coming back? It's almost becoming comical, if you ask me. You know, the Lord's coming back on this day, and the day goes by, and everybody kind of like, all right, Lord, are you there? The other night, I was so exhausted from coming home from a basketball game that I looked out in the sky, and the sky was red out, and I didn't know it was the northern lights. But I remember thinking to myself, Lord, if that's you, please come now. And that's the last thing I remember before I went to bed and woke up the next morning. He still hadn't come. So we don't know the day or the hour, right? We don't know. But that doesn't mean that we can't be faithful in the present while we wait. That's what we're called to do as Christians. And part of that faithfulness is being stewards of what God has given us. And so we're going to read this text from the Gospel of Matthew. We're in chapter 25, and we're starting at verse 14. It says, again, the kingdom of heaven can be illustrated by the story of a man going on a long trip. He called together his servants and entrusted his money to them while he was gone. And he gave 5 bags of silver to one, 2 bags of silver to another, and 1 bag of silver to the last, dividing it in proportion to their abilities. He then left them on his trip. The servant who received the 5 bags of silver began to invest the money and earned 5 more. The servant with 2 bags of silver also went to work and earned 2 more. But the servant who received the 1 bag of silver dug a hole in the ground and hid the master's money. After a long time, their master returned from his trip and called them to give an account of how they had used his money. The servant to whom he had entrusted the 5 bags of silver came forward, and he had 5 more, and he said, "Master, you gave me 5 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 5 more." The master was full of praise. "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you more responsibilities. Let's celebrate together." The servant who had received the 2 bags of silver came forward and said, "Master, you gave me 2 bags of silver to invest, and I have earned 2 more." And the master said, sounds familiar, "Well done, my good and faithful servant. You've been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you more responsibilities. Let us celebrate together." Then the servant with 1 bag of silver came and said, "Master, I knew you were a harsh man." That's always good to tell your boss. Harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I would lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back." But the master replied, "You wicked and lazy servant. If you knew I harvested crops I didn't plant and gathered crops I didn't cultivate, why didn't you deposit my money in the bank? At least I would have gotten some interest on it." Then he ordered, "Take the money from the servant and give it to the one with the 10 bags of silver." All right, so we're going to transition and just a little bit more context as we transition away from that. So in Jesus' day, wealthy people often went on long journeys for business. I think a lot of times we think we do have accessibility of travel far greater today than at any point in human history. But in those times, travel was possible for the wealthy. And so the wealthy often traveled. And so when they traveled, this was not a strange idea in the ancient world. And servants were often given great responsibility while their their masters were away on these trips. And they didn't have cars, right? They didn't have airplanes. So these trips to and from took a long while. And so, whenever we go on trips, we make sure, the dog is or the cats are fed, right? Or they're boarded up, or we make sure our kids have a babysitter if we happen to get away for just a trip solo away from the children. That happens, I'm told. I'm not experienced it yet, but I'm told that happens at some point in the parent journey. And so we attend to those things as well, right? We make sure that all of our things, and so if it's going to be a long period of time, obviously there's more preparation and more trust that you give people to take care of your things while you're gone. So this is what that master was doing. He was entrusting his estate to his most trusted servants while he was gone. So it's important to know that. The other thing that's important to know is a talent was not a coin. A talent is actually a weight of gold or silver. And so just to kind of put it in perspective, if a talent were worth 6,000 denarii, and a denarii would have been the currency used in this time period when this was written, then it would take 20 years, 16 to 20 years for a servant to be able to accumulate the amount of denarii that a talent, in this case, would have been. Because a denarii is wages for one day in general for the average person. And these servants are not like servants like we think of them. They still earned money. It's not the kind of slavery that we've been taught about in our country's history. This was a very different type of slavery, a very different type of servanthood. So even the servant who got 1 talent received an enormous amount of money. That's my point. So he was not just saying, okay, here's a couple, $10 or $20, if you need to go get some food, good luck, and I'll be back at some point. He is leaving 20 years of wages, potentially, with these servants while he's away. And so it's a pretty amazing responsibility to be entrusted with that level. And as we look at this word entrusted, we look at verse 14. It says, he called together his servants and he entrusted his money to them. And that word is really everything in this text. The money didn't belong to the servants, it was entrusted to them. And that kind of leads us to our first point this morning. You're a manager, not an owner. In other words, everything that we have is on loan from God. Everything. In Genesis chapter 1, verse 28, right after he's created human beings in his image, God says, be fruitful and multiply. Fill the earth and govern it. Reign over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, and all the animals that scurry along the ground. You might notice God didn't say, here it is, this is all yours now. Good luck. He's saying, govern it. He uses words like manage it, take care of it for me, is the language we get from Genesis chapter 1. And then we get to Psalm 24, verse 1. He makes it even more crystal clear. Literally says, the earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all its people, belongs to Him. And so God owns our paychecks. God owns our houses. God owns our cars, our retirement accounts. He owns our time. He owns our abilities. And to even look at it this way, in a minuscule way, He owns our very next breath that we're about to take, folks. I remember one of my really close friends, he gave me this enormous responsibility. He had a really, really, really nice car, and he didn't want to take it on the trip that he was going on. And so while he was away, he was also petrified that something would happen to it just sitting as long as it needed to, as long as he was gone. And he looked to me, and he said, you're the only one I know of our friend group that knows how to drive a stick shift. And it was a stick shift. So he said, I'm going to need, if you could just take this out every once in a while, just make sure, and this is a very expensive, very nice car. I don't know if you've ever met somebody like this, but they talk about their car all the time. Have you ever met that person? Like, their car is their baby, right? Their car, and so like there's an enormous amount of gravity and responsibility whenever he hands over his keys to me and is asking me to go out and drive this thing while he's away. And I'll be honest with you, I was very reluctant, and I really almost said no. Because I knew that even if somebody parked next to him, because we lived in an apartment building, even if I knew somebody parked next to him and accidentally scratched his car, even if I wasn't present, you know whose fault it would become? Because I was responsible in that moment for his vehicle. And so there was a lot of fear and trembling as I put my hands on the wheel, and I honestly kind of forgot about how to even drive stick shift. I was so nervous, right, that I had to drive his car. And I think I took it out like maybe once or twice while he was gone, because I was just that nervous. Because I felt the gravity. I felt the weight of what it meant to be entrusted. And hopefully he doesn't ever watch this sermon. That silly old car. He doesn't have it anymore, so maybe he's not as attached. But how much more, folks, are we to feel the weight and the responsibility of all the amazing blessings that God has given us? We are stewards. We are managers of someone else's property. And when we think we own something, we often ask questions like, what do I want to do with this, right? What do I want to do with this? Whenever we know that we're managing something and we're entrusted to something, our questions change. In other words, when we know that God is loaning everything that we have to us while we're on this earth, our questions become more of, who does the owner, what does He want me to do with this? What does God want me to do with what I have? And it's a really dynamic shift whenever you start to have that thinking. It's a completely different question, and it changes everything about how we spend our money, how we use our time, and how we make decisions. Because we're not just talking about money this morning. We're talking about our abilities. God has gifted you with abilities. He's gifted you with spiritual gifts that you are to use for the glory of His name, for the furtherance of His kingdom, so that others might know who Jesus is. And it's very easy to squander those gifts that He's given us and not really even use them. One of the things that I think that we squander, because I do it myself sometimes, is my time. That is a gift we are called to steward. We are given a finite amount of time on this earth. And when we look at it as God's time that He has given us, we start to look at it a little bit different. We start to ask questions like, God, how do you want me to spend my time that is actually your time? And so I don't think it could be overstated, this entrustment that the master gives the servants. It's a heavy weight. Not in a bad way, but in a, wow, God, you trusted me? Out of all the people, you trusted me with these things? It's very humbling, I think. Now, if we look at what the servants actually did with what they were given, it's very striking. We can say many good things about the work of the first two servants. They did their work promptly. They did their work with perseverance. They did their work with success. The master was very pleased with how they had spent their money or his money, and how they had even invested it to the degree that they found it yielded some interest. And I never knew anybody that was mad about that or sad about that, right? And so we look at this text, and we see that they took initiative. They took risks, and they got to work. And the next point is, faithfulness often means taking action. Now, I put often means because I've had seasons of my life where God has kind of put me on hold. There have been seasons where I felt like I was to be in a preparation mode, where I felt like God was preparing me for the next season. And I know some of you have gone through that. If you're not going through that even right now, some of you may be. It's not an excuse, though, to stay there forever, right? But more often than not, faithfulness means taking action. Instead of just standing there after the servant left, or after the master left, the servants got to work. They took action. And here's some practical realities that Jesus, I believe, is teaching. That God doesn't expect us to wait for a burning bush kind of moment. Those happen. I think those are completely legitimate, and they have happened in the history, and they're biblical. I mean, that's literally where the burning bush moment moniker comes from. Sometimes folks have angelic visions, or they have angelic visitations. That's amazing. I think a lot of us are looking around waiting for those kind of things to happen. There are times where we have to step out in faith. You see, the wonderful thing about that word faithfulness is what? It includes the word faith. In order to be faithful, there has to be a certain amount of faithful actions that we lean into, that we press into. Sometimes God says exactly what He wants us to do, and He speaks to us. I've had those moments. There have also been terrifying moments. You'll notice in this text, this is one of those moments where God the master literally says, here's the money. And he doesn't tell them exactly how they are to use it. They have to figure it out. They have to step out in faith, and they have to kind of touch the floor with their eyes closed to see if they're on the right path. Make sure there's not a ledge there, right? That's what faith. If there was not a certain amount of mystery in life, and we knew all the answers, and everything was crystal clear about everything as it related to the Bible, as it related to Jesus, there wouldn't be a whole lot of faith involved, would there? I'm the guy that likes to plan. I'm the guy that likes the answers. I like to know where I'm headed. I like to know what I'm doing. I like to know the next step in the journey. But often that's not how God is operating. He's saying, trust me. Trust in me for how you are to live, and I'll show you the way. And so this comes down to a few practical things that I just want to pull and tease out here. One is that the Bible teaches that the first 10% of our income belongs to God. We get that from Leviticus chapter 27. We read about that in Malachi chapter 3 as well. And the beautiful thing is, that's the Old Testament principle, by the way. My pastor always preaches it this way, and I won't steal and say that I came up with this, but he says that the Old Testament principle is 10% of your income. And I've heard some people, including myself, kind of grumble about that at times. Like, 10%? That's a lot. And so Pastor Tim often says, like, well, actually, the New Testament principle for giving is you give everything. I mean, that's what Jesus says. You give everything. And all of a sudden, 10% sounds pretty good, right? I mean, if we look at it that way. And so this is an idea of just a practice that is biblical and is very, very appropriate, I believe, as an exercise and a practice for us to remember that every time I write that check, every time I give that tithe each month, it is a reminder that actually this is not my money. This is God's money that He's entrusted to me, and He's asked me to give just 10% of that back to Him. Just 10%. I think Jesus is also talking about our time. I've already mentioned that. Unlike money, you can't save time, and you can't get it back. And so you get 24 hours today. Use them or lose them, right? And so Jesus is talking about more than just money. He's talking about time. In John chapter 9, verse 4, it says, "We must quickly carry out the task assigned to us by the one who sent us, for the night is coming, and then no one can work." Jesus modeled wise time management. 3 biggest time wasters that keep us from being faithful stewards of what God has given us in the way of time. Procrastination. The greatest time wasted is getting started, right? Sometimes we wait so long to get started on something that by the time we even get started, it may be too late. I used to say, I'm not like this anymore, really since I met my wife. I don't know if she has anything to do with this, but I used to put the pro in procrastination, right? I used to wait till the last minute for everything. What a poor way of wasting the time that God has given us. Another way that we can waste our time is poor planning. We don't budget our time in the way that we budget our money. In other words, we just kind of float through life and hope things happen, and we're not really intentional. And we've talked already about being purposeful in a previous core value, so I won't linger on that one too much. And then the last one is a lack of priorities. Everything seems equally important. And when we say that, nothing is really important, right? There are times where we have to look around and say, I have a lot of things that I need to get done. I have a lot of things that God has called me to do, but what has He called me to do that is the most important for this season, for this day, for this hour? And so those are just some practical ways that we can look at what Jesus is talking about. But it really comes down to this idea that faithfulness often means taking action. How will we act? God gives us free will. He allows us to waste our money or to use our money. He allows us to waste our time or use our time efficiently and intentionally. He allows us to waste our abilities or use them for His glory. We have that free will to choose how we will use these things. We get to decide, will we be faithful stewards of all that God has entrusted to us? And then the final point I want to bring out from this text is that what we release, God multiplies. We talked about multiplication a few weeks ago. This is talking more in the sense of your finances and your time and your abilities. We see that the first two servants, they did an amazing thing, right? They did exactly what the master asked them to do, and the master was pleased. He said, "Well done, good and faithful servant." They acted. They went to work. Conversely, we see the third servant did not. It says, "Then the servant with the one bag of silver came and said, 'Master, I knew you were a harsh man, harvesting crops you didn't plant and gathering crops that you didn't cultivate. I was afraid I was going to lose your money, so I hid it in the earth. Look, here is your money back.' This servant hoarded what he was given. He protected it, he buried it, and in the end, he lost everything. The other two servants released what they were given. They invested it. Like I said, they risked it, and they gained everything. There's nothing better than to hear the Lord say, 'Well done, good and faithful servant.' There's nothing better. So here's the principle. What we grip tightly, we lose. Isn't that kind of ironic? What we grip tightly, we often lose. But what we release generously, God multiplies. This principle is present in Luke chapter 6, verse 38. Give and you will receive. Doesn't make a lot of sense, does it? You're giving away. How am I receiving anything? I'm giving it away. Your gift will return in full, pressed down, shaken together to make room for even more, running over and poured into your lap. The amount you give will determine the amount you get back. So let's see how this works practically. When we release our money generously, God often increases our capacity to earn more so that we can give more. We experience a joy that people who hoard never know. We get to partner with God in changing lives. When we release our time generously, God multiplies our effectiveness in the time that we have left. We build relationships that matter for eternity in the time that He's given us. And so we see how this generosity multiplies and multiplies and multiplies, and it blesses us just as much as it blesses the Lord. And so it's an amazing thing that we see. And we see what the Master said. You have been faithful. I love this. I wish I could put it on a t-shirt. You have been faithful in handling this small amount, so now I will give you many more responsibilities. Whenever God sees that we have been given or we're entrusted and we're giving this time that we're using or this money that we're using our undivided attention, it may seem like a small amount that God's entrusted us to, but whenever we show our faithfulness in those responsibilities, He is faithful in return to give us more responsibilities as well. Now, I'll close in just a moment, but I want to be careful here. I want to be very, very careful, because sometimes folks read these texts, some preachers preach these texts, that when I give more, that means God's going to give me a jet to fly around, right? That means God's going to give me some big swanky, 10,000 square foot mansion to live in, right? That is not what this text is saying. I'm sorry if you were disappointed in that. This is not a prosperity gospel, folks. This is not I give more so God gives me more. It's more of I give more so that more are blessed and I receive more joy from the blessing of giving than I do in receiving any material possession. That's really what this text is talking about. And so that is not just this time of year, though. I think we're all geared up, ready to go. We got Black Friday next week. It's going to be great. We got Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving's next week, right? It is. Sorry if I just freaked anybody out. It's not this week? I know it is. It's not this coming week. It's the week after. Yeah. I'm right. The point is, oftentimes we feel in the spirit of giving during this time of year. And that's wonderful. I love the overflowing boxes back there for the Operation Christmas Child. I love when people do the gingerbread trees and the angel trees. We do those too. I love, love, love that we feel this spirit of generosity for this time of year. I think it's whenever the church shines its best. But the reality is that's not what the Scripture's talking about here. He's talking about this is a lifestyle of generosity. This is a lifestyle of being a faithful steward. We don't hoard our money all throughout the year only just to give it in these 2 months. It is for God to bless others all the days of our lives. And so the question becomes here as we close is how are we using what God has given us? How are we using it? Because it is what He's given us and it is still His. How are we using our money? How are we using our time? And how are we using our abilities? So I just want to invite you, as we pray about this, as you think about this, the question will never be, how much did my stuff stack up against everybody else's? In our culture, that becomes a question that's asked quite often. How did my stuff and my accumulated materials and assets compare to everyone else? There'll never be that question when we come before the Lord. It will never be, how much did I accumulate? My granny, when she passed away last year, a couple years ago, she looked at me and she said, I can't take any of it with me. And how true is that? How true is that? The question will be, were we faithful with what the Lord entrusted to us? Amen? Let's pray. God, I pray that as we think about this principle and this core value, God, that you've entrusted to us today, God, we would pray about the other things that you've entrusted to us. God, it's not about material possessions, God. It's not about accumulation. It's not about how much can we get from the world, God. It's how much can we give of what you've entrusted to us, God. How much can we bless others? How much are we able to help others seek you and to know what you've done, God, through your Son, Jesus? So, Lord, I pray that as we enter into this season of generosity, Lord, that this would just be not only a reminder, But for some of us, it would initiate a lifestyle of generosity. A lifestyle, God, in which we give so that we may not receive back and accumulate material possessions, God, but we may receive the joy that others might know you. That we might receive the joy of others knowing your love and your grace and your mercy and your power in their lives. We thank you, God, for all you've entrusted us. As your broken vessels, God, we are your humble servants. And we thank you. We pray this in Jesus' name.